Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We're less than 2 weeks away from the start of the Test summer, less than 3 weeks away from the World Test Championship final. The men's Ashes is 4 weeks away and the women's Ashes starts in just under a month. It's beginning to feel very real. I'm Yas Rana and with me today is Phil Walker, Jo Harman and for the very first time, Mel Farrell, who will be one of a couple of new additions to the podcast roster over the course of the summer. Mel, great to have you with us. Looking forward to some overdue Ashes balance to keep the angry Australian YouTube commenters at bay.
And what an entrance, by the way. Half hour ago, with your two suitcases, staggered in, fell arse over tit, both of them, didn't you? Well, emerged into our office, staring from the floor upwards.
It was kind of the way, I wouldn't say arse over tit.
Okay, you barreled in.
The big suitcase went over and then I fell over it and ended up straddling it sort of almost on hands and knees.
Yeah. It was characteristically, classy and reserved.
I always make a classy and elegant entrance. Yeah. So that was a really good way to start, I feel.
Starting as we mean to go on. We have talked loads about England's build-up to the men's Ashes, but not a huge amount about Australia. Mel, what's the feeling in Australia? You just come back from Australia. What is the feeling in Australia about the series? Are they seen as favourites there?
Come on, Australia always think Australia's favourites, don't they? That's part of being an Australian cricket fan. That always expect to win. Look, it's a funny thing, right? So big difference between Australia and England, I find. England, people who watch cricket in England are England fans, okay? Passionate about cricket in England. They follow it. It's behind a paywall, all those reasons. That it's a club structure, all of those things. In Australia, people who watch cricket like cricket in December and January. And they often don't pay much attention for the rest of the year. There's football on whatever code you're into. So, I read the papers every day when I'm over there. It's not a lot. I can tell you it's been making news about various fast bowler injuries, of course, being played up as much as possible. But it's kind of been reasonably low-key. The only other thing that makes a bit of a ripple was anything that Stuart Broad says, because the man's a genius. If I could do one thing in life just half as well as Stuart Broad manages to wind up Australian cricket, I would be a very happy woman. He's absolute genius. So, he'll make a few headlines, but feels a little bit low-key. And of course, they've got the World Test Championship final on first. So, but when Australia are away, it takes a while. It takes till something really happens, I think, before Australian fans really get into it.
I've never really thought of it like that. Sorry, Jo. I've never really thought of it like that. But that applies over here as well, really. There's just a completely different buzz around it in the build-up to England going out to Australia, not least because you're fatalistic and you kind of know what's going to happen. But there's a buzz and a burble around the build-up to a home Ashes that you can't begin to replicate when England go away. But I always just assumed that it's a constant with Australia. But this is a story, right, that's come out in the last year or two that there are these sort of periods in the year where the Australian sporting public are focused on the game, but it's not this constant thrumming presence through their lives.
No, there are a lot of people who will turn on the TV on Boxing Day because it's part of a Boxing Day thing as opposed to they're mad cricket fans. I find that's a huge difference across the board. Like even to the point of almost everyone who's a cricket fan in England will be a Surrey fan. We're sitting here at the Oval, a Surrey fan or a Hampshire fan or a Yorkshire fan or whatever. There are very few people I've met in cricket in Australia, with the exception, I reckon, of probably Adam Collins and Jared Kimber, who would say, I'm a diehard Victoria fan or I'm a diehard Perth, Western Australia fan.
So are you not then? Do you not have a state allegiance particularly?
No. I don't even have a country. You know me. I'm very impartial with my two passports.
Citizen of everywhere. Yeah.
Child of the world.
And what about the World Test Championship? Do people care, or is that being seen as a kind of Ashes warm-up? Because, it's a chance to be the world champions of Test cricket.
Yeah.
In theory, it should be an exciting thing, but it doesn't feel like it's got that level of attention.
Yeah, I just think anything. Australia go anywhere in the world. And I've talked to some of the players about this in the past as well, just about how you can go under the radar when you play for Australia outside of Australia. And that's just part of it. I mean, that's part of why they've also, the Big Bash is now being shortened again, because they tried to go outside that magical window of December and January, and it's really, really hard to make any indentation in the football at the moment. It's coming up to State of Origin time. The AFL is in full swing, so it's hard to get cricket headlines. So it's there, but to your point about England, when they play an away series, I think there's usually more interest and buzz in England for an away series than there is from Australian fans for an Australia away series.
That's interesting to hear. 22 years since they won over here. And I just imagine saying that to the 20-year-old version of me, to think that they wouldn't win in over 2 decades in England when they used to just do it perpetually. So there's a massive amount on it, right? And there's history at stake here. It's not just another Ashes series every 5 minutes we have another one. 22 years since they've won.
And the last chance for a lot of these players who won't be coming back.
Yeah, and I think also a feeling that they let it slip last time in 2019. They certainly, some of them will probably think, and various people in the England team might disagree, but that they let that one get away. I mean, look, we're here at the Oval, and I've got vivid memories of standing down there watching the presentation and seeing Justin Langer with a face like thunder. And it was really weird because England had won the test, the series was drawn, Australia had the Ashes, and the players were like, they looked a bit miserable, and Langer looked furious.
Yeah, and the English boys didn't quite know how to react either.
It was weird.
There was a sort of collective slump across, because after Headingley, you'd think, all right, England are going to kind of get to Old Trafford and run away with it potentially on the back of that Stokes thing, but then didn't really turn up at Old Trafford. And then you think, well, right, once it's 2-1 Australia with 1 to go, they'll make sure it happens. They should have won in 2009, scored all the runs, took all the wickets, and still didn't win that series somehow. 2013 was a weird 3-0 to England that could have been 2-2, could have been anything. You thought, they've got to get to the Oval and do it, and they ballsed it up as well. So this is a big itch that they have to try and scratch.
It's almost like winning
is unheard of.
Well, yeah, it's almost like winning a test series away from home is hard.
Yeah, sure.
Amazing, right?
Sure, but it wasn't hard for a long, long time. Trust me, it really wasn't.
Yeah, that 2019 series was weird just because it was so soon off the World Cup. There was just a physical and mental exhaustion, really, for a lot of the England team in particular who'd done both. I mean, looking at the Australia squad, I just think this is the best Australia squad to come over to England in maybe since 2005. I think there are very few holes there. A lot of guys coming with a lot of experience of playing in England. Players like Khawaja, Head have achieved so much in the last 4 years since they last came over. It's a pretty settled unit compared to England. Had a lot of success in a very short space of time, but a lot of these guys are still relatively unproven against the best sides in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a very good side. And it could be. I mean, I hadn't really thought about that too much. Maybe it is the best side since 2005. There have still been some pretty good sides that have come over. I mean, there are quite a lot of players from 2019 too coming over. So, and then you look at players that aren't even in the squad. I know people over here have been watching Michael Neser, and I hope we talk a lot more about Michael Neser because some of us are on that bandwagon. But yeah, you look at some players who haven't made the squad, and it's quite, a fair point that I think you make. It's funny you say that because of being at the Oval again, it just reminds me of 2019, the glorious summer that was. And I hope we can replicate that kind of series because I'm looking forward to this Ashes more than I've ever looked forward to an Ashes series before.
Why?
Because Bazball, even though I'm not allowed to say Bazball, and I don't know why I'm saying it like that. Bazball.
I think it has to be said. Can't not.
No, it does, because on one side, that's the beautiful thing, isn't it? If the series in Australia hadn't happened and been so miserable, we might not be in this position now. And that's the beauty of Ashes cricket, that the narrative never ends. So it's down here and then it can come up here again. And that's what is so remarkable. But at the moment, let's face it, in the past 12 months, which test side has been more exciting to watch than England? They have made test cricket sexy again in all sorts of ways. So it's been brilliant to watch. And then you've got an Australian side who are also very aggressive, quite calculated in their approach to an away series, I think. But, an amazing side. And so you've got this clash. You've got everything that happened in Australia last time. You've got the unfinished business of 2019 that Australia's there. I just think it's going to be a really exciting series. I can't wait.
I think there's excitement here as well that this is a good Australian side. And I get the impression, speaking to my kind of friends who are kind of casual cricket fans, there's not I really want England to beat Australia. It's more, I really want an exciting series. I really want a close series between two good sides. And we did have that in 2019. The Ashes actually hasn't served up too many of those over the last 20 years. Certainly in Australia it hasn't. They've been pretty dismal showings from England, bar one. Whereas it feels like if both sides play to their potential, this just should be a really good series. Both sides should be able to win a couple of tests and then who knows? Might go into the fifth one with it all still live.
Remember what Stuart Broad said a couple of weeks ago? The one in Australia doesn't count.
Of course.
The Void
It's a
series.
void, yeah.
To be fair, I did every day of that test match. I think there were only 3 journalists who managed to do every day of that test match because of the COVID situation. And it was as miserable a series as I've covered. So hopefully this is much better than that. And I think it will be.
I'm sure it will be.
And just going through that, looking at that top 7 of Australia's and asking the question of how strong it is comparatively to other versions of it. And also how strong are these particular individuals compared to what they were 4 years ago. So if you take Labuschagne and Smith out of the equation because we know what they are, you're likely to probably still have Khawaja opening with Warner. That's how they'll begin, you'd have thought. Warner obviously really struggled out here last time out. Khawaja averages 27 in England. But Khawaja's had a great 2 years, and so much of the game is played up top and all of the rest of it. So he could well be a different proposition over here to the Khawaja that we saw before. And then you look at the middle order, and Travis Head, again, has no kind of record in England, and played for Sussex last year, didn't make a 50. I don't think he's made a 50. No, he's made 6 50s in 36 innings in England across his whole career. So you would think Aussie-style player, doesn't quite work for him with the moving ball, etc., etc. However, he's a different proposition now as well. He has a different identity in that Australian side. There was always that sense before in his early years as an Australian cricketer that he wasn't entirely sure if he should be there. Well, what you saw in the Void series was some pretty substantial cricket, actually. And that 150 he whacked at Brisbane, I think he made another 100 at Hobart. Or I think it was Hobart.
Adelaide?
Oh, I can't
Didn't he,
remember.
when
He
they
made
went to
another 100
Adelaide?
anyway, didn't he, in
Because-
the series?
yeah.
Both at a run a ball.
And I think we might have spoken slightly disparagingly about him before the.
Yeah, I
before
did.
the
I said
series as well.
he's no one's idea of a decent Test match number 5, and he went out there and smashed 450 runs at a run a ball. The point is, he comes into this series now as one of their danger men, and especially if England are intent on reducing the boundary length, which is the story in the Times from last week. Now, it might be a bit of pre-Ashes scurrilous nonsense, but if they are genuinely thinking about trying to eke out every last little advantage that they have in their heads regarding Bazball, then it would make sense to reduce the boundaries if they do that.
Jack Leach might beg to differ.
Jack Leach, 13 overs for 101 at Brisbane in that first Test match, and Travis Head tore him apart. So if they were to do that, England, then it's clearly a red rag to a bull, and the likes of Head
Cam Green's hitting them nicely.
and Cam Green, that monster at number 6.
That's the game changer, isn't it?
It
They
is.
now have balance to their side that they've never had in my time watching Australia. And it's what Stokes should provide this England team, but probably realistically won't be able to because he's not going to be able to bowl that many overs, it seems. So Australia definitely have that advantage. I'm really excited to see him. I mean, he could have an enormous series.
Yeah, I think Cam Green is as one of the most important players to have emerged in Australia in the past couple of years. But, for the obvious balance thing. But also, I don't think we've seen the complete package from Cam Green yet. There are times when, he kind of emerged as a more of a batting all-rounder, but then there have been times in his career, because it took quite a while for him to get his first Test wicket, and then it came, and then for a while it seemed like his bowling has sort of taken over because he's a serious bowler.
He bowled beautifully against England last time out.
Exactly. That's where it kind of started. In fact,
Yeah.
he didn't make the big contributions with the bat. It was more with the ball. So there have been various times that he's shown glimpses, and obviously he's there all like 10'8" of him with his massive buckets for hands in the slips as well. But yeah, there's a sense that he's still so young in his career and he still has so much to learn. And I'm going to be fascinated to watch this. Do you know what he told me in Pakistan? This is on a tangent, but to give you an idea of how raw Cam Green is. We were talking about bowling reverse in Pakistan. Anyway, he was telling me that he sort of was only just learning how to flip the ball from one hand to the other when he was running in to disguise which way the ball was facing. And I'm like, you're learning that now? Like he's only just learning that now? And I was just really surprised that that's how much he is still learning about the game. He's learning at the top level.
You tap into something. If he has played a red ball game in England, I can't remember it. Even if he's played a white ball game in England, I can't remember it. Perhaps he was on one of the ODI tours where people forget about it before it's even happened. But
I don't think so.
No,
No.
So he may not have played a proper game, professional game in England. Now, the theory goes that you take a bit of time to acclimatise the Travis Head scenario. But if he is, as many in Australia have described, the next great cricketer off the conveyor belt, then how he goes will go a long way to deciding or determining how this series actually plays out. Because if he can have a proper series, then he balances the alchemy of that Australian side is so perfect. If you can have a number 6 who can run and bowl 140 clicks and make, if he can have 2 or 3 good knocks against an aging ball in that series, but 60-yard boundaries. My God, the more I say it, the more terrified I become. Then that tilts it towards Australia for me.
60-yard boundaries, is that tall that honestly his shadow will reach the boundary rope from the middle?
Yeah, I know, it's terrifying. But equally, he could have a quiet year. We've had many players have come over here from all the countries with massive reputations, and for whatever reason, it doesn't quite work for them. And some great Australian batters have not ever quite nailed it in England, from Warner to Michael Clarke to others. It's not quite worked for them.
And you can always, I find it weird with Ashes series how much emphasis is put on really quite short Ashes records, because like you obviously by definition haven't played that many tests against Australia, but you can say like Head had a bad series here in 2019. He played 4 test matches. Bairstow has I think he's played like 12 home Ashes test matches and never got 100. Root's not scored an Ashes 100 since before he was captain. You can kind of put narratives in all these players based on actually not that much cricket, and taking into account where they were at that particular time in their career, etc. Ben is in Ireland, by the way. That's why he's been missing.
Still
the last
tweeting.
couple of
What's
weeks.
wrong with him?
But he is still tweeting us. He asked a question for Mel.
It's an addiction.
It's a cheeky question. How many tests do you give David Warner?
That's the question of the moment, isn't it? Probably the only real selection question that has been rumbling around. And look, George Bailey, head of selectors, former Mr. Smiley cricketer who hit 28, was it, off of Jimmy Anderson over at the Wacker. I don't know why I bring that up, but I just do. But George Bailey was, smiling assassin. Now he's the smiling assassin of careers, perhaps, as Australian selector. But he has said, and Andrew McDonald, the coach, has said, the Warner will play in the World Test Championship. They've sort of made that clear that he's the incumbent, starts off there. I see that Alan Border has been saying they should give Warner 2 tests at least. I don't know. You talk about the records before and how they're over a small period. I mean, the consistency of Stuart Broad coming over the wicket, able to get Warner out. Over the wicket or around the wicket? Have I got that mixed up?
Around the wicket.
Yeah, around the wicket.
Yeah.
I thought so. Hang on, over the wicket. No, it sounded immediately wrong. Yeah, Stuart Broad coming around the wicket to Dave Warner became such a theme of the last Ashes. What did he average? 10. it'll be interesting to see in the World Test Championship final. I think he needs at least one good innings. But if, say, Mohammad Shami comes around the wicket and gets him out cheaply twice, maybe you might not see him start. I don't know. I would think normally I would agree with Border, give him the first two. But you saw what happened with Travis Head, like with Travis Head, and then with Usman Khawaja coming in when Head was unavailable in the last Ashes. Got a ready-made solution there, Australia.
And also Marcus Harris is building a strong case in county cricket. You know, it's Div 2. You do have to add that caveat, but got a couple of hundreds this year. Got a lot of runs for Gloucestershire and Leicestershire over the last few years, and does look a better player than when he's played Test cricket previously.
Yeah.
That said, it's still a big jump. I mean,
it is.
I don't imagine they'll be jettisoning Warner too quickly, because also it's such it's a difficult one because it's such a big story. Whatever you do, there's a case that can become a distraction if he's in the side and not scoring runs. Yeah. But also, if you drop him, say Harris has a couple of difficult tests, you probably can't really go back to him. So you probably want to give him every possible chance.
Yeah.
Which I think
it's
probably
tough.
two Ashes tests.
No, that's why I think the World Test Championship is going to be really interesting to see how he goes. And you know, he's obviously his against him is his record in England in the Ashes against Stuart Broad, but for him is obviously his talent and his ability over a long period of time, and his ability to, you know, he scored 100 in one session in Australia at one point. So, you know, he does have all of those things, but
Are you surprised he's back? Because I know Ponting said he felt that Warner should have retired after the kind of the emotional 100 out in Australia over the winter, and that would have felt the perfect time to go. Given that his record in England isn't great, even when he's been at his best. It's hard. I mean, this could yet be the glorious finale, but it feels like he's missed out on one opportunity for one already.
Well, but maybe that's it. Maybe that's what's driving him, the unfinished business thing, and the fact that he hasn't been able to do it here. I'm sure he would love to. I mean, clearly, Warner would obviously love to be part of the first side in how many years, Phil?
22 and counting.
To win an Ashes series in Australia.
But I think that's it, exactly that. And if you were to flip it around, if you were to talk about, and we do, you talk about England's great cricketers, have they ever won in Australia? And until they do win in Australia, there will always be a little mark against Joe Root for all that he's an all-timer in our world and across the whole globe. There's always going to be that little mark because he's never made 100 in Australia and he's never got close to winning a series in Australia. So that will be for Smith, for Warner, for Cummins. It'll be an obsession. It will be a red ball obsession to get that one over the line. This has become the last hurdle, really. This in India is the last hurdle for them.
But that's right. Oh, but also I think the interesting thing is that there's been less enthusiasm, or they've just been a little bit more reticent to commit to Warner being in the Ashes squad, the Australian selectors. So compared to how firm they have been on the fact that he is starting for the World Test Championship. So I think there's a little clue there. That
and it's shaky. The Warner relationship with Cricket Australia has been clearly shaky for a long time. It feels like he's desperate to cut his ties with them as quickly as possible, apart from the fact that he wants this final crack at England.
Well, I think there's a big difference between the Australian team and the people around the Australian team, and then the organisation, the corporate structure. But part of that's because, you know, Warner has been very involved with the Players Association and the, you know, when they were doing the MOU negotiations, which went much more smoothly this time, but the previous time. So he's been very outspoken too on players' rights, players' pay, all of those kinds of things. And then the whole Sandpaper Gate thing as well, and what the treatment was after that, rightly or wrongly. But I think that's very different to the way Warner probably feels about the team and the people around the team. So it's a bit of a disconnect.
Just briefly on the pitch, if you look at those four openers across the two teams, the likely starters, Khawaja said, you can tell that I've just written this, Joe, as well, you know.
You're just reading out the whole thing.
Yeah, just literally wrote it yesterday.
You never heard Phil with so many stats, but Go on, you've got another one, haven't you?
22 years.
I've got a quote. Khawaja said, You go to England, you go with low expectations. If you're an opening bat, if you're a top order bat, you go with low expectations because it's the toughest place to play, toughest place to bat in the world.
Yeah.
And what that means in reality is that you become a moments player if you're an opening bat. So, and this is the rationale around Crawley, without going into the specifics of the bloke, but the idea of Crawley, the idea of Duckett makes sense. And so, if you transfer that idea over to Australia, then if Warner goes blob, 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 but then smashes a 70 on his wits in a innings where your average score is 220, 230 across the game, because this is how the teams are going, then that suddenly becomes totally valid to have him in that side, because of course there's going to be a handful of balls that have his name on that he's going to have nothing, no one can do anything about. Broad's going to do what he does, Anderson's going to do what he does, and flip it over. Cummins is going to go after England and do what he does, Hazelwood, etc. But if you can get away twice in a series across 10 knocks as an opening bat, then in England, with the unique conditions that they face, that validates your role in the side.
Well, I was just wondering there, as Phil was talking, whether England would want Warner in the Australian side or not. You'd think Stuart Broad would have to want Warner in that side because of his record against him. But I wonder if England as a whole, you would probably rather be bowling at Harris, really, I think, despite how poorly Warner went last time.
Yeah.
Who knows what they think, these lunatics?
And also they will say, we don't care. We don't care.
They're going to reduce the boundaries to about 6 metres and just say, let's have a hitting contest. And then spray it around at the end.
If they do that, they should get Jamie Overton in. We were watching the Surrey players range hit before.
He should open the bang.
Jamie Overton was hitting the ball as far as I think I've seen anyone hit a cricket ball earlier today. Anyway, Phil, what's your moment of the week?
I often say it when I do know what it is, but what is it?
Ollie Robinson.
Ollie Robinson is fit.
Yeah.
Ollie Robinson is not crocked. Probably this week he's not crocked.
I think everyone's delighted with that, aren't they? Going back to this kind of idea of it being a series of the two sides that are best.
I'm delighted. I'm sick of blimmin' England losing fast bowlers before a series.
Yeah.
Stop doing it.
Yeah.
Right?
Just stop.
Stop it. Just stop. Stop with the injury to fast bowlers.
I always get a mini heart attack because I normally find out the injury news by the BBC Sport notification, and they cut off the crucial word all the time. So there's one yesterday that was 40-year-old James Anderson, RE ... And I was like, shit, is he retired? Is he injured and is he gone? I was like, fuck.
Well, Ollie Robinson
he's fine.
is in the squad for next week and is retained in the squad for next week because the ankle problem that he had, and he bowled through. He bowled 17 overs, 1 for 40 odd in the second innings when Glamorgan was, racked up 730 odd.
And he carried on bowling. I saw Farbright saying it was fine because it hurt him more when he was walking than when he was running.
That can't be medically correct.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Keep bowling.
Pretty wishy-washy to me.
But anyway, I think he staggered out of Hove in a protective boot, but as it stands this week, he's okay. And of all England's quicks or all England's seamers, he's the one. He's the most precious of the lot, I think, because he is the most likely to play 4, if not even 5 of those test matches. Obviously, Anderson exists like a sort of, the Elgin marbles, and you protect him and you get whatever you possibly can out of him. But Robinson would be probably your banker, I would say. Now Jim Bunny Robinson rather than slightly heavy set Robinson pre that last Ashes tour. So he would be your banker. And obviously if he does play, even if Viv's playing against him, he's still going to go at 2 and over. So he offers that precious
and he's
control.
In such good form as well, hasn't he? I mean, we know he's too good for county cricket, but he's proven that again over the last few weeks.
Nick asked, is it bad luck or something else that means seemingly all our fast bowlers have been or are injured? I was looking at this, and actually Archer's injured, but he's been injured for a couple of years now. Stone's injured, but he is kind of always injured. And the others are just having small niggles, and they seem to be broadly fine. I looked at how many overs the English guys have been bowling in the county championship. They've all bowled about 100, which is about half of what the leading county bowlers have bowled so far this summer. So I don't think they've been over bowled. I know that people always want to attack the England management for something. I don't think they can be blamed for these guys having sore ankles. Or do you think?
No, I'm not going to start blaming people. I really don't even understand how it all works.
Yeah.
But I would say that Mel says is frustrated with English fast bowlers getting injured all the time. If you look at Australians, they've all had problems in the past, and I know Hazelwood's had issues recently, but actually it's been remarkable how they've managed to keep their best fast bowlers on the pitch. And I think largely through wrapping them in cotton wool at times and saving them for the big events, not playing loads of one-day cricket. But then that's true of England's bowlers as well. I don't know. Do you think Australia are doing something that England aren't?
Well, England generally play a lot more, right?
Mm.
They play way more cricket,
Yeah.
just in general, than Australia does. And part of that is because they're a Northern Hemisphere side, and so they do a lot more touring as well. So there's a cumulative effect on that when you look at how many overs often that they bowl. But I was thinking about that because the build up to this series, and there's been so much about England and who's playing where and who's, cooling their heels or running drinks at the IPL and who's been getting, niggles over here. And the Australian team, by and large, except for a couple of them who went to the IPL, the others have all basically had a month off. They took all of April off. They came back. They had a week sort of in Brisbane where they came together, and then they were given another week off. So this week, all off again, and then they'll just come together to come over here. Arriving in Liverpool, they'll have some bonding and training. So it absolutely feels like for this series, they have managed it to a T to make sure they're all fresh. What's that? What's the Tim Payne cherry ripe? They're all cherry ripe to go. It does feel like they've done that quite well.
And they've done it in the past as well. Was it the 17-18 series where we were saying, well, all their quicks can't play all the tests, and then obviously they did, and England got thrashed, and we're like, well, they've managed them pretty well in the lead up.
Yeah.
It's so true. So and they've actually got options now. This series is going to be interesting because it's so condensed and played over such a small period of time. Plus, they've got that World Test Championship. That's why I think it could be likely that we might see Michael Neser come in, or even Sean Abbott if they do have some problems. Josh Hazelwood, I think, is the one who's interesting because he had that Achilles heel.
He left the IPL early, didn't he?
Yeah, has had side strain issues. So he's the one that you would look at. But man, they got Scott Boland.
Yeah, he did okay last time.
Yeah, he did all right. He's going to be interesting to watch in this country, just also by the by.
100%. David asks, is there anything more extraordinary than this stat? Anything in the world? Jimmy has been going so long that there's only 5 degrees of separation between him and Len Hutton, who debuted in 1935. So Anderson played with Alex Stewart, who played with Graham Gooch, who played with John Edrich, who played with Close, who played with Hutton. That is a pretty good stat.
He's right. There's literally nothing else quite like it.
I was going to say
in all of civilized history.
I was going to say the telephone has always blown my mind. That 100 years ago you could phone someone in the States.
I've always thought the fax machine, which isn't really
in a similar mold.
As
yeah.
my mate was saying the other day, in the office he works at, there were young members of staff who didn't know what a fax machine was.
Oh wow!
Which made me feel pretty old.
It is. I wrote this last year, but I am convinced that somewhere in the bowels of the pavilion at Old Trafford, there is a painting of Jimmy Anderson that's all withered and wrinkled and like long straggly strands of white hair. It exists. We're going to find it. The picture of Jimmy Dorian Gray Anderson. It's somewhere. It's wild.
Beautifully done.
Well, yesterday marked the 20th anniversary of Anderson's Test debut. A certain Mark Butcher was the player of the match as England beat Zimbabwe in that game at Lord's.
Easy runs.
I spoke to Butch. He took a few wickets as well. I spoke to Butch earlier about what it was like taking the field with the young Jimmy. Mark, yesterday marks 20 years of Jimmy Anderson, the Test cricketer. You were actually the player of the match on his debut. You scored 130 odd and took 5 wickets against Zimbabwe at Lord's. What were your impressions of Anderson in those early days on that tour of Australia in 02-03 and then that Test summer? So he takes a 5-for against Zimbabwe at Lord's in debut, and then he plays every single Test against South Africa in that 2-all series where Graham Smith batted forever. I think he was the only English seamer to play all 5 Test matches. So yeah, what were your early impressions of a 20-year-old James Anderson?
Well, early impressions were that he was fabulously talented. I watched. I was at the World Cup game against Pakistan, where he took a hat trick, didn't he? In the 2003 World Cup. So I'd kind of seen him bowl live, but obviously hadn't shared a dressing room with him. And then he gets picked at the beginning of the summer, rightly so. Few injuries knocking around. I think Caddick was injured. Oh no, Caddick had actually been left out. He didn't play another Test match after Sydney 2003. And so this really shy lad with a red streak in his hair comes into the dressing room at Lord's, and I kind of sort of took it myself and Freddie as well. I would imagine. Did Fred play in that Test? No, he can't have done. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been doing all the bowling. So I think, so I probably took him under my wing a little bit, or at least, just made sure that he felt like he was at home and comfortable, and kind of tried to make him feel welcome in the dressing room. And then, he bowled quick in that game at Lord's. The pitch had a bit of pace and carry and bounce in it. And I think he might have started at the nursery end and was kind of a little bit all over the place, and then got a switch up to the pavilion end, and that's when the magic started to happen. He just bowled quick, full, swinging, pace. A really sort of skiddy pace. Swung it, bowled some unplayable deliveries. A couple of sort of batters looking to knock them down to fine leg for one and losing their off pole and stuff like that. And he was magic. I loved him immediately. He was just so unassuming, so naive, so kind of pleased to be there. And he just looked like he had all the talent in the world. I actually saw a clip the other day. Somebody sent it to me of the whole, highlights of the whole game, which I'd never seen. I'd not seen that innings before of mine. I'd seen a couple of the wickets before. That's the bit I was most interested in. And Jimmy had this sort of Brett Lee load up with his right hand. He'd pull it back, which he doesn't do anymore. I don't know when he stopped doing that. But I was really surprised to see the action is kind of basically the same. But there is that little change where it was very much what was the coach's name? The Australian guy who coached England through the 2005 Ashes.
Troy Cooley.
Troy, that's it. Troy Cooley. Yeah, that was one of his big things, was that kind of like that load up of pulling that trigger of the bowling arm back and in tight across the body, and he would do that. And I was really shocked to see it, because I kind of forgotten that was part of his bowling action at the time. But he had that whole thing with the head dropped, but he just had amazing wrist action, and that the action is still pretty much exactly the same apart from that arm. Really fluid, really smooth. And he was capable of bowling genuinely quickly then. I mean, I don't think the body stood up to the rigors of being able to do that day in, day out. And of course, as he got older and wiser, the pace came back a little bit, but the accuracy was incredible. It was wonderful. So myself and a couple of the others went out for a drink after the game. So we finished it at day 3, maybe, I think, and dragged Jimmy out with us. And had to tie him down and put a funnel in his mouth to get him to have a drink. And all in all, just really great memories of just a lovely lad. And I remember thinking at the time, he's got some serious talent, this boy. But did I even imagine that he'd still be playing 20 years later, let alone 10, really?
Yeah, I mean, he was quite un-English in quite a few ways in terms of his meteoric rise. I read something on BBC Sport the other day. He started the 2002 summer playing a lot of cricket for Burnley Cricket Club, let alone the Lancashire team. He was still playing a lot of club cricket 12 months before he makes his Test debut, less than a year before he does what he does at the World Cup. And then also in terms of his style as a bowler, obviously, now we think of him as quite a classical English seam and swing bowler, but he was, as you say, quick, really quick, and swung it late.
I mean,
was happy to
he was more. Runs. He was more Naseem Shah than than sort of your Ollie Robinson, back in those days. And I don't think, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I don't think enough has ever been made of that, and how rare that is in English cricket. In Australian cricket, or in cricket around the world, having spent a lot of time in Pakistan recently and stuff, you can envisage a situation where somebody like Isanullah gets spotted at a net session or something, and the next thing you know, he's playing for Pakistan. That sort of thing. Players, particularly bowlers, making a meteoric rise from grade cricket straight into finding themselves playing for Australia. There's an often told story in Australian cricket, but in English cricket, it's very, very rare, and it's something that, I mean, don't get me started on how I would do it or how you would make it happen. But it's something to me that is that really ought to be more of a part of the game in this country. We have an enormous amount of clubs, enormous amount of people play cricket to a standard, to a decent standard, and yet there seems to be, there is this absolute chasm between playing for your club on a Saturday and maybe turning out for Surrey or for Lancashire or whatever it might be, and it perhaps it shouldn't be that way. Well, not perhaps. I think it definitely shouldn't be that way. And part of the reason for that is, no, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. but it seems to me that his story is one that is important because it is so rare. And perhaps if we could find ways in the general scheme of things in terms of English cricket to make that something that happens more often, that people feel that there is a pathway directly from representing Burnley or Cheam Cricket Club or whatever it is to find themselves playing for England, then the game actually might feel a little bit more like it's as though there's a chance for everybody. I think that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I mean, you're completely right. Just this week, there was that guy, Arafat for Kent, 26 years old, part of the South Asian Cricket Academy, first-class game after taking loads of wickets for Blackheath Cricket Club. He gets rid of Ollie Pope, Ben Folkes, Will Jackson, Jamie Smith on debut. Like, he's clearly quite good, and he hadn't got an opportunity before then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, taking it forward 20 years onto this summer's Ashes, we've had a few injury scares over the last couple of weeks. And I guess one player we've not seen in the Ben Stokes era so far is Sam Curran, and he played a prominent part in a Test summer now 5 years ago against India in 2018. He only played one Test in the 2019 Ashes. He bowled very well to Steve Smith. With the injuries, with the way England want to play, it gives England something different in terms of angle, if not pace. With the injuries around, do you see a way that Curran ends up playing a part in this series?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, that it might be that the captain finds himself in a situation where he can't bowl, and then he might have to find another position for himself in the batting order. I remember somebody mentioning this a few weeks back. I can't remember. What did they say? Somebody said he should open. It wasn't me, but I'm more and more coming around to the idea that it's not a terrible idea. And then England then need an all-rounder, a bowling all-rounder to kind of to deepen the batting lineup and to be a second change bowler. So I could see a situation where that might arise. And I'm sure that Ben and Rob have very much sort of got him in their thoughts, despite the fact that he's not played at all, not featured in one Test match since Bazball started. But I think England are going to have to be pretty, and I'm sure they are. I mean, this is the whole point of the reason they've been so successful. They kind of covered off a lot of this stuff behind the scenes without making a big song and dance about it, which is very much Rob Key's style, obviously, and Ben's also. But at the moment, I would imagine that England's bowling lineup, all being well, will look something along the lines of, if Stokesy's bowling, then you'd probably have one of Anderson and Broad plus Wood plus Robinson, Leach, with the captain being the fourth seamer is how I envisage it going at the moment. But then you've got the likes of Matty Potts who's going really well, Sam Curran potentially making some sort of a part in it, and the 5 Test matches over the course of just over a month, there is likely to be some sort of change of plan, or plan B or plan C required. So look, I don't see any reason why Sam Curran would be disregarded altogether, because, as you say, there are certain attributes that he has that might come in handy, but it might require other circumstances in terms of the squad for him to find his way in there.
Just on potential plans B, C, D, etc. Jack Leach has obviously done well for Stokes. He's actually had a quietly really impressive start to the summer, actually. He's one of the few spinners who's taking wickets. But there's a situation where if Stokes isn't bowling that much, the pitches aren't offering much to spinners, the balance of the England side attack in particular will have to be different. How flexible do you think England will be? Because they've been pretty almost admirably stubborn in many ways in the last year or so. They've really backed players that they feel that are part of what they're trying to do, and Leach has been central to that in many ways. Can you see England deviating from that quite quickly if Stokes' knee prevents him from bowling much?
No, because I think the way that he would do it was that he'd want the left arm spinner in his side. I mean, he's backed Leach more than any other captain. Well, I suppose it's only been Joe Root, but much more than Joe Root ever did. And he's come up trumps for him in doing so. And I think Ben believes, as I do, that you need, to play test matches, you need that variety in your attack, where you need a slow bowler, a spin bowler in your team. So I think he would do everything in his power to make sure that Leach remained a part of that side. I think he stays. That somebody like Travis Head might come and have a go at him. England have become much better at kind of protecting a bowler like Jack Leach from guys having a go at him than perhaps with Joe Root in the past, where with Joe, he would tend to stick them all on the boundary and then just make him complete, just the most defensive bowler in the world. That the opposition then didn't have to attack him at all in order to score 4 or 5 runs and over against him. Then if he bowled a bad ball, it was 9, Whereas Ben Stokes will give him the odd scout, but also, make the batters have to take a little bit of a risk in order to score their runs. And that's the art of captaining spin. And in doing that, he's given Jack Leach the confidence to bowl better, basically. I mean, without putting too fine a point on it. And so I think he'd welcome that challenge, and I think Ben Stokes would welcome that challenge as well. And as I said, look, in both instances, the instance when you asked me about Sam Curran and the instance where you asked me about Jack Leach, I think the same thing still applies. If Ben Stokes cannot bowl, if he cannot play a proper part as a fourth seamer or first change seamer or whatever it is for England, then there is no chance on earth that Ben Stokes is not going to play. He has to be there captaining that side, and so therefore he might have to find himself a role that is different up the order at the expense of one of the the top order players, which does not include anyone batting 3, 4, or 5, in order that he can then get his 5-man bowling attack again. I think that is preferred way of doing it. I mean, look, of course, if you lose 2 games to rain and suddenly it looks like being a 3-day game, all of that changes. But all things being equal, the normal run of a 5-match test match with whatever time losses that you get naturally to light and whatever else, I think they're going to want to have 5 bowlers.
Well, only 2 or 3 weeks of build up to that first test match remains. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you soon.
Hey, that's 2 or 3 more podcasts of speculation, wild speculation about stuff that's probably not going to happen.
At least there's an England test match next week as well that we can actually talk about.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Joe, what's your moment of the week?
My moment is a chat I had with Heather Knight a few days ago. She was just back from a team training camp in Lake District. It was it sounded kind of vaguely reminiscent of the Bavarian boot camp under Flower and Strauss in 2010-11. That there was kind of cold water immersion, hay bale jumping, tyre throwing. She said they got put through their paces mentally and physically, which they're going to need to be well prepared for what's coming at them in the next couple of months, because we know that's a very, very good Australian side. But the focus of the interview really was on Heather's own Ashes story, which goes back to 2010. She made her debut at the Bankstown Oval. Were you there for that one, Mel? In Sydney, 2010 Ashes?
No, my first Ashes was 2012 at Wormsley when Heather Knight made 150.
Was it 13?
Oh, 13, sorry, yeah. 2013 Wormsley when she made the 150 odd, and Laura Marsh made the slowest ever 50 that the world has ever seen. And in a multiverse, she is still there, dead batting the ball on a soft wicket. And those of us, we actually wanted to steal the ball. The ball did come towards us in the press tent, and we're like, just Just nick it and something, or get a new ball into the hand. Get her out, for God's sake. No, it was a remarkably stoic innings, I must say. But yes.
Well, Heather said, that partnership she did concede was probably not a great advert for the game. But her innings was really the landmark knock that I think really made her stand out as a potential England captain. Certainly a player who's going to play for England for a long time after that. But she really talked about that debut at Bankstown Oval as being anticlimactic, was the word she used. It was at the stage where the Women's Ashes was only decided by the Test match before the multi-format point system came in. And she said that was right at the end of the tour. England had just beaten Australia 4-1 in the T20s and then had this Test match. And she said it was almost like, we better play the Ashes before we fly home, which you compare that with what we're heading into now, it is chalk and cheese. The whole thing is completely changed. And I think, obviously it's been changing dramatically over the last few years, but seen it more than ever this summer with even the way the ECB have marketed it. It is 2 Ashes being marketed together. You see
dashes.
Yeah, and the promotional stuff you see, it's Anderson alongside Silverbrunn. It's not the headliners and support act. It is a it's a 2-pronged event, and Heather's obviously keenly aware of that. And she said the 100 is what's made the difference. The 100 has caused the ECB to think again and have a shift in mindset and think, well, actually, if we give them the right opportunities, then that will be reflected in ticket sales. That will be reflected in interest. It will be reflected in revenue. And it's a great place that the game finds itself in. I think they're just about to announce that they've sold 70,000 tickets for the Women's Series this summer, which is the most they've ever sold for an international women's summer. And that's, 2 weeks before, no longer than that, a month before they even start playing. So this is a really significant moment off the back of the WPL, and we're seeing what women are earning out there and the interest. This series is going to be, we've been talking about the men's being an exciting one, but actually this, for the women's series, this is a completely different prospect, I think.
That's really, it's really interesting to me because Australia's gone completely the other way. So when the FTP came out, the first women's FTP came out, they've moved away from holding men's and women's Ashes in the same summer. So they're completely separating them, and their reasoning is that they think it's built up enough in Australia now that it can stand on its own 2 feet and it's a draw card in its own right. And this was off the back of that brilliant Test match last time in Canberra. But they did the same with the Big Bash as well. It started off, they were double headers. They went alongside, and then they decided, no, we think they get lost too with
that is
being double
interesting.
headers. Yeah, so they've gone the other way.
Yeah,
and that was the way they were going to go here as well. It was a happy accident through COVID that the 100 games ended up being double headers. They were meant to be played separately at smaller venues. They didn't have that luxury because of obviously logistical issues. And then it exploded in a way that they just did not think the women's tournament would do. And I think that naivety has been highlighted over the last couple of years with 100, and now it's everyone jump aboard. And you could argue they've come to the show potentially a bit late in some ways, and Heather particularly highlighted the scheduling, saying the women have always been bottom of the list. You just get slotted in where there's a gap, and that she said, we've played an Ashes game Tuesday, 11 o'clock in Leicester. You're beaten before you even start, really. Whereas now they get a prime slot in the schedule, and again, surprise, surprise, it's reflected in ticket sales.
But what I find is going to be interesting is, so they've managed to do really well in that there are hardly any clashes. So they hardly play on the same time. I think there's a couple of days where the men are playing the Test, presuming that all the tests go to 5 days, and I'm not convinced that they will. And we love a 3-day test. And then the women play like a T20 at night. So they've actually done really well to do that. Having covered both for a long time, and a long time in the same summer, I have always found it really interesting, and that the media interest in the women's game is almost completely dependent on how the team from that country is doing in the men's Ashes. So loads of times, so say that 2012 series, the first one I did. During that series, I was doing stuff for the Australian media at home. The only time they rang me for reports was when the Australian men had a bad day. And I could hear them on the radio, like the introing, saying, "Oh, Australia is doing great in the Ashes. Oh, yeah, no, the blokes aren't, but yeah, no, the women are doing really well." And that would happen in newspapers as well. It was Australians like reading and hearing stuff about Australians winning. So that's the sort of coverage that I often used to see given to the women's Ashes. So for me, it's going to be very interesting this summer just to see how the media from each country treats it, because it's still really, really hard. Great ticket sales, blah, everything else. But it is really hard to get real estate in media publications still on women's cricket.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've been banging on about this quite a lot, but next summer, Sri Lanka and West Indies are the two main test touring sides for the men's team. And I think having the women's Ashes then, when there's less interest naturally over what the men will be doing that summer, I think the women's Ashes ticket sales are obviously probably helped by having them together. I don't know. But because I don't know how much of that is just to do with women's cricket, which is being so much more popular than it was 4 years ago in terms of actually turning up and buying tickets. So yeah, I kind of think that would have been really successful if it was on its own. I don't know.
I just think in and of itself, 70,000 punters already.
That's brilliant.
That is unheard of.
Yeah,
really, in our country.
But they've never given it.
And while I think Australia's, as you describe it, I think they are further down the line to, and there's virtue in arguing rightly that women's cricket is so established now in the Australian cricket sporting culture that it doesn't need to tag on or dovetail or anything like that. But there's a cohesiveness in Australian cricket across the genders that hasn't applied over here until recently. And there has been a definite separation. And there has been a sense of you do you and we'll do us, thanks very much. Well, no longer is that anywhere near as evident. And so I think we are somewhere down the line to getting to that scenario where, sure, as you described, in an ideal world, you're selling 80,000 for a summer where there is no men's cricket to talk of, as in for next summer. But in the here and now, I think on balance, whipping up energy for cricket generally will feed into other cricket that's being played. And so I like the fact that it's not merely just a canny PR stunt, but it actually has some value and some resonance over and beyond that.
I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think it's going to be interesting to watch and see how that unfolds this year. And because it is, man, it's still hard when it comes to women's cricket to get any real estate. Obviously not for the good people of Wisden Cricket Monthly. Naturally.
You're of that parish these days, Melinda.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm a believer, baby. And I was the only journalist who went from Australia, apart from one from cricket.com.au, to the World Cup.
Yeah.
Right? Like nobody sent anyone, not even an agency. There was no coverage whatsoever, except for basically what I did and what I organised for them. And that's the Australian team, who are arguably the best cricket team Australia has ever produced in terms of success. So, yeah, it's still really, really hard to get that kind of real estate. I know it's got a lot better in recent years, but it's not always an easy sell.
I wonder if the venues this summer will help as well. I mean, as you've said for quite a while, that ECB needs to take a chance and give the England women's team games in big cities rather than just playing in kind of Essex, Leicester, which has worked well for them in the past and has been like a hub, and Taunton's another one. But actually this year they are the test matches at Trent Bridge, they're playing at the Oval, they're playing at Lords. That is also naturally going to bring more media along than it would do, rather than asking people to go to Wormsley or Kent as they have been in previous years.
I mean, last year with the women's test match against Africa, that was, I think it was Monday to Thursday in Taunton. It's like, you're not giving it any chance to succeed at all.
That test, I must say, one of the biggest things I'm looking forward to this summer is that test at Trent Bridge. Playing with the Duke's ball as well. You know, as being able to see them play with the Duke's ball 5 days and at Trent Bridge, for me, that's one of the highlights of the summer. And
I think that is, and certainly speaking to Heather, this is even more my feeling, that that's England's chance as well. That comes first before the one-day stuff. Heather was still absolutely gutted that they didn't manage to get over the line at Canberra, having looked like they were going to lose that game, then looking like they were going to win it, and then having to settle for a draw. She obviously played a knock for the ages to kind of get England in that position in the first place. And she said after that, in hindsight, the stuffing was completely knocked out. Then they went on to lose the ODIs 3-0, and it was a bit of a miserable tour in the end, again affected by COVID, just like the Blokes had been as well. It feels like that to me, to stand any chance against Australia's side, they need to win that test match. And then you might get a bit of momentum that you can work with. But just Australia are so good in the white ball formats. They just eat up victories that it feels like it would be a hard one. I mean, if they lose, then I think it's done. If they draw even, I think that's where they've got to get their noses in front.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's just insane how good they are. Just how much depth. Just the fact that they've got so many different options at any particular time to look for a player to stand up. It's just crazy. And Meg Lanning, since Meg Lanning, since she came back from her sabbatical, off the pitch, she's way more relaxed and chatty and laughing more, like even in press conferences and stuff. But on the field, if anything, she looks even more scarily focused, and focused Meg Lanning is terrifying, right? Really, and she's looked like she is really, really on a mission. But one thing, I don't know, have we heard anything about the pitch for that? Are they going to have a fresh pitch? I haven't seen anything.
I haven't heard anything. I guess we're still some way out, but
let's hope so.
Given the bad press it got last time on a used pitch, you'd hope that is something they've rectified. I'd be, given all the energy that needs to be put into this Women's Ashes series,
that's what
I'd be shocked if it wasn't a fresh pitch.
Good.
Following on from our conversation last week on the disparity in the ICC revenue split, I thought I'd mention what Ricky Ponting had to say this week about it. I can only assume that he heard what you said last week, Phil, and was moved to comment. He said, that question has a different answer in different countries. It is becoming increasingly difficult to groom youngsters in the Caribbean, for instance, who want to chase the dream of playing Test cricket. Their payment system in the Caribbean compared to some of the franchise leagues, it doesn't match up, and Sri Lanka will be the same, Bangladesh will be the same. It's not the case in India, England and Australia. You're paid well to play Test cricket for your country, and most aspire to play the Test match game. There is a role for the ICC to play here. Make the payments a bit more even across international Test cricket to attract those players from these different countries who want to play for their country. It is something that has been spoken about at a very high level at the ICC to help that. But in India, the feeling I get is that most of these youngsters aspire to wear the baggy blue cap, and the same in Australia.
I wonder if the ICC will make any kind of statement regarding this in the build-up to the final, because it's deafening from out there. And it's right that famous people are saying this, but Jesus wept, it's incumbent that the bosses do as well, right? And at least acknowledge that this is the conversation of the era. And it's heartening to hear Ponting say these things. Like many other greats, it's good to hear them say something. You'd like them to maybe say a little bit more on top of it. There's a lot of punches that are pulled. It's not, it didn't escape my notice that this was an ICC press junket that he was at to promote the final. How much do we need to hear from the ICC themselves? Because at the moment, it's just a wall of silence, as if everything is okay. Well, we know it's not. So I'll be listening very closely in the build-up to it, because all the big wigs will be here. The general managers, the chief execs, the chairman, and the questions will be asked. Will they be answered?
Well, we said a few weeks ago we used to lock them in the same room. And just be like, talk.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, well, the last time the chairman spoke over here last summer, then
it wasn't fit for purpose.
It was a bit, and I must say, it's so wonderful to be actually here in person and seeing you smiling and cheerful, because I confess
I'll say anything for a buck. Don't worry about it.
I was so worried after your your big rant last year.
Oh, don't be worried. We get that every other day. He's fine. He bounces back.
He does bounce.
He's
Look
more
at
resilient
his
than he
cheeky
looks.
little face, that smile. That's more like it. Who's a good boy?
Stop it now.
But when you have those kind of statements, so obviously for Wisden Cricket Monthly, as a true believer, I've been doing a lot of those interviews, those state of the game kind of interviews with everyone from Ricky Ponting to Belinda Clark or Graham Smith, or all these different people. And what is also deafening, the phrase that they keep using, and it was the same phrase that you heard after the MCC Cricket Committee met last time as well, is that the game needs strong leadership right now. I have heard that phrase so much over the past sort of 6 to 8 months. And the difficulty comes then because the game's governing body is made up of boards that have very disparate interests and their own issues as well. And I mean, just in the past few months, I covered a lot of South African cricket. I was in South Africa. Then, we had West Indies also out in Australia and South Africa. And then I went to the Caribbean. I was in Antigua for a month. So it's given me a whole different perspective too, because you talk about countries like West Indies and South Africa, and they need more of this. They need more money because they need more Test cricket and everything else. So you go then, I was with a lot of the Scotland players when I was in Antigua, and then you realise, oh my God, like what these guys have to actually deal with. And they're showing up at World Cups and playing against these other teams. And there's the disparity in what's there. I know the associates technically are getting more money, but a smaller piece of the pie, and people are pointing to the fact that it's still more money, but it just gives you this different perspective. So even then you look at it from West Indies or South Africa, take another step into a different area of the ecosystem. And all I want is to know what the 5-year or 10-year plan is for cricket. What's the vision? Like, where are we heading? Where is the game's guardianship want cricket to be in 5 years or 10 years time? Every business has a 5-year plan, right? Or 10-year plan. And that's what I'm not sure where it is, because I just don't, I hear vague, whatever. And the game's being sort of dragged around by market forces of franchise cricket. And it's like, okay, but we need some kind of, where's the end point? What are we going towards?
Yeah, and in all that talk about strong leadership, it's a very easy thing to say, but there is a vacuum there as it stands, and there is a disconnect between the people that are saying it and who get coverage on news websites, and magazines, from Ponting to Graham Smith to whomever. But then there's this disconnect between them and the people who are working at the ICC and making the decisions. If there could be, and within that kind of unbridged space, there is this MCC Cricket Committee, which is like a kind of conscience thing.
They're a pressure group, effectively, aren't they?
Or some sort of casual lobbyists or something, and they're there, and every now and then they pop up on in your inbox, and they make a little flurry, and they offer a couple of thoughts, and then we drift away again. But there needs, it seems to me, to be a greater connection between the voices that are listened to and respected and who inspire us for what they've done and what they feel, and those sort of rather faceless characters on the other side who are actually the people making the decisions. And it would seem to me that if the ICC could energise a Ponting or a Smith or an equivalent to such an extent that they can agree to become a part of the decision-making process across a more a diverse board, a board that represents all kinds of different positions, and that they would come to that with the power of having already achieved. They have nothing to lose, but they have everything to fight for. That would then, to me, help the ICC from a PR perspective. It would also help them from a position of actually having the strength of conviction to do the right thing. And it would balance that sense, or it would mitigate against that sense that it is perhaps a rather toothless organisation as it stands, and that it is perhaps rather enthralled to some of the big beasts out there, with various national boards. But as it stands, it's hard to really empathise with the ICC, because you hear nothing from them, and there's nobody in there that you can go, I know you, and I know that you are fighting the fight that we need to see played out.
I don't know. So I see perhaps a little bit differently in that, and that's probably just because I know people at the ICC, like you do as well. The ICC had a lot of people involved in that organisation who are really passionate and work really hard about, for cricket all over the place.
I don't doubt that.
But I think sort of sometimes the disconnect is, then you have the decisions being made at board level, and then you have all these people who basically have to work with what they've got to work with. And that sort of happens as well.
Oh, for sure. As you're right, I know a number of people who work at the ICC, proper cricket people to their bootlaces. I've got friends who are in the overall umbrella organisation of the ICC who I respect very much. At board level, I just think if you could find a way to bring about a couple of real icon figures in the game, and especially if you could find a couple of Indian icon figures and persuade them to have a more hands-on role, rather than doing well-intentioned but ultimately rather flimsy statements from the sidelines while living a very lovely life. Thanks very much. I sometimes find myself willing these great figures to get their hands just a little bit dirtier, and perhaps it's more incumbent on them. I don't know. Perhaps it's simplistic.
But that would need the boards to kind of loosen their grip and give away and admit that they won't be quite so self-interested. I mean, this is what the Wolf recommendation said in, when was it, 2012, 2013, that it was like an old boys club, and that still seems absolutely true now. And I take Mel's point about the people beneath fighting for the good of the game. I mean, it's almost like kind of being a civil service beneath an inept government. But what can you actually do other than do what you're asked to do?
Perhaps I'm missing the point here. But it seems to me that the ICC.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you. But it's just who is going to allow what you're suggesting to happen.
It seems that the ICC is facing a crisis of its own authority in a way that I can't remember. Certainly, probably since its inception, because they can feel their power drifting out of their hands, right? Seeping out of their hands as private equity and all the rest of it becomes the dominant way of cricketing life. From that position of desperation, perhaps they need to entertain the idea of doing things slightly differently. And if it does mean effectively going cap in hand to a handful of people who speak to the people and whose agendas will be well established. We know what Ricky Ponting's agenda is for the world game. He wants to protect it. He wants to see it flourish, of course. He wants a sensible balance, but fundamentally, he wants young men and women in green caps and young men and women in blue caps, as he says in that statement. That's what he wants. That's what most people want. So perhaps it's from that position of fear of their own irrelevance, the ICC might need to think slightly more imaginatively. I want the ICC to still control the game. It's still the best model that I can come up with, because otherwise it's carnage. But if it is so toothless, then perhaps it needs to try and grow a few.
Just as last week, as we followed the ICC discussion with the promise of something slightly happier and more optimistic, are you dreaming of some winter sun? Can you see yourself relaxing on a beautiful beach of soft white sand, hearing the gentle lapping of the crystal clear waves whilst you sip on the drink of your choice before watching an exhilarating match between England and the West Indies? If so, join Gulliver's Sports Travel on this exciting cricket tour following the current T20 World Champions as they tour the Caribbean for 5 T20s and 3 ODIs this December. Their fully escorted tours can include everything you need from flights, accommodations, transfers, the all-important match tickets, and much more. Gulliver's take care of all the details so you can relax and enjoy the fast-paced cricketing action in the sun. Call them today on 01684 878 979 or visit their website. We'll leave all the details in the description as ever.
Well, after just coming back from a month in Antigua, that pretty much sounds like what my month was.
Yeah, normally I think with random England white ball tours, I'm like, why is that happening? Was that one?
You're up for
I
that
can
one,
get
are you?
behind that one. I can get behind that one.
I have actually done that with Gulliver's, actual trip. Yeah, they are the Dons.
There we go.
I can highly recommend it.
Fantastic.
Amazing.
Well, moving on to the county championship. The championship takes a little break now as the Blast gets underway. Surham and Durham extended their leads at the top of their respective tables. The story of the round for me was that there were 3 players from the South Asian Cricket Academy who made their first-class debuts.
So that's 7 now?
7. I think 2 of them had played first-class cricket before and 5 of them are complete newbies. So Zaman Akhtar at Gloucestershire, Zainul Hassan at Glamorgan, and Arafat Bunyan at Kent. Arafat took a forfeit at the Kia Oval. He got rid of Ollie Pope, Ben Folkes, Jamie Smith and Will Jacks on debut, which isn't too bad. And I think a few people pointed out as well, one of the cool things they're doing is getting people who are slightly older, so players who have had opportunities in second 11s, have done really, really well, but just for whatever reason don't get opportunities at first team level. Kent have been quite good with that. They did that with Ben Compton last year as well.
Just very briefly, boringly, but briefly, on Surrey, third morning, I think it was, the game was done by lunchtime. They were up in the game against Kent, but after an hour, the game was basically done, hour and a half. Their 5-seam attack is as good as anything I've seen ever in county cricket. They come at you, they are relentless. It's a test quality attack. That's what it is.
And they lose Kemar Roach in this.
And they lose an all-time great, and they're fine.
The depth is terrifying. I mean, they famously had that ridiculous depth when they could lose kind of 5 or 6 England players in the 90s, turn of the century. It feels like they're back there now, really. That they've still got Sam Curran to come back. Will Jackson just making his way back.
Jamie Overton didn't play.
Yeah. I was going to mention on the talent ID thing. There's a guy who made his RCB debut the other day in a must-win game for RCB. A leg spinner who's 24. He'd never played a professional game before, and he was identified with a system that supposedly uses AI to scout players. So you know how you get like footage on a grainy camera phone of a guy bowling leg spin. The system basically can work out what speeds and how much they're turning it to very accurate levels. So they kind of know exactly how good someone is, even if they're in some place in India that doesn't really have a big professional setup, which is scary, I guess, if we're...
It's all scary,
it's all scary.
We've managed to avoid AI in this podcast so far.
None of us are going to have jobs. Wisden is going to be put together by AI bots, isn't it?
Well, I don't know. There'll always be a debate over who should open the batting for England. That I think we can do better than AI. That's my hope anyway. Elsewhere in the Championship, there's a big win for Hampshire as they kept the pressure on Surrey and Warwickshire up top. Somerset got their first win of the season over Middlesex. Essex and Lancashire drew despite a bold declaration from Tom Westley. Worcestershire beat Leicestershire despite being bowled out for 83. And as I mentioned earlier, Durham won with Ajaz Patel taking 10 wickets in the game. Mel, your moment of the week is from Division 2.
Michael Neser, Centurion. You might have heard me mention him a couple of times on there. I mean, we all know that Bharat Sundaresan and Adam Collins have started up the Neser must play hashtag.
Can you explain to everyone why? Because he's obviously got this kind of cult hero status.
Yeah.
Why has he got that? What's he done to deserve this kind of level of adulation?
I mean, he was the forever fringe dweller, right? He has been the forever fringe dweller. And he's such a nice guy. And you see him around doing everything that the team needs, always cheerful. And having spoken to Colo and to Barra as well, they just didn't, because he's so unassuming, they felt like he wasn't banging his own drum hard enough. So they decided to take up the call. And the hashtag Neser must play was born. And then after he actually made his debut in Adelaide, took that wicket, was it Milan that he got out when the lightning was...
Yeah, I remember the reaction to it.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever been happier for a player taking a wicket.
And you could see that from his teammates as well. Everyone absolutely wild.
That's right, because he was just always there every time. And, we would see him do things like, I remember watching him bowling off spin in the nets in Melbourne to Andrew McDonald's son, because that's the sort of guy he is. He'll do whatever he needs to do, even if that means bowling off spin. Of course, they turned beautifully, as you can imagine. But yeah, this idea, there are those players who you always say, they were unlucky to be around at that time. And Australia have had the big three, and it's been really hard for other bowlers who probably would have played a lot more tests or played a test at least.
And then Scott Boland nips in ahead of him as well.
I know. And you can understand that as well, because if it was Scott Boland, was another one there. But yeah, I think a lot of people just have that soft spot.
It's a classic underdog story as well, right? So,
yeah, exactly. The nice guy, and especially coming off the back of a time where I think it's a little bit different now, but this feeling that, the Australians are all big meanies that sort of hung around pre-Sandpapergate probably more than now. And I think, it's, nice to support a nice guy. And he's a cracking bowler.
Yeah, well, this is it.
It's the thing. It's not just about him being a nice guy. It's what he does with the ball. I mean, that hat trick.
Oh, that was ridiculous.
Why?
That was ridiculous.
If you're a right-hander, I mean, call me stupid, but I reckon don't leave the ball when Michael Neser is on a hat trick. Do not leave the ball. It's a bit dangerous. He's a cracking bowler, and
he's been really good this season as well for Melbourne.
Absolutely.
Joe, the T20 Blast started over the weekend, but really begins in earnest this week. Who's going to win it?
I say with absolutely no confidence whatsoever. But no, Birmingham Bears, absolutely. This might be recency bias because I actually watched them win on telly at the weekend. But they got a really good side. They beat Yorkshire quite convincingly in the end, despite being 33 for 3 or something like that in the first few overs, which famously you can't win T20s if you're in that position. But they did. They came back really strongly. Sam Hain, who's definitely become a kind of county cricket core celebre, the sort of new James Hildreth, who's makes loads of runs across all formats, but can't seemingly get a sniff with England. Played brilliantly for an 80 not out, a quick one. So they've got a lot, and they've got nice young players. Got Dan Mousley, who you're a big fan of, Jake Bethel, who didn't play in that game but is on the fringes. 2 good spinners in Danny Briggs and Jake Lintott, and Hassan Ali, who didn't play in that game, is due to stick around until the end of the Blast. Just had a niggling injury. And then you've got Moeen Ali and Glenn Maxwell to add to the group after the IPL's done. So strong. I think it sounds like they've got all bases covered, and they've been there or thereabouts. 2 quarterfinals in the last 2 years where they've produced absolute stinkers of performances and got thrashed on both occasions. But they're a good side and as likely to win it as anyone.
I think the Blast should be I think a better competition this year. So it was quite compact last year. But you had lots of England white ball games, so you lost a lot of players when you got to knockout stages. So you have a team do really well and they lose quite a few of their best players, but there's no England white ball cricket this year that overlaps with the Blast. So the squad should be relatively stable throughout the competition. There's a bit of news around the Blast this week. So Kent have become the first team to charge for their live stream. The first game is free for people who sign up. The whole thing is free for members, but if you're not a member, it's £6 per game. Their CEO talked about costs ever increasing. These things aren't cheap to put on, but I think it's quite a bold step, Phil. They're the first one to do it, obviously, but £6 feels like quite a lot for people who haven't decided to become members of the county.
Yeah, I was surprised to see it this quickly. Definitely make a case for it down the line, but perhaps Kent have just simply gone first and the others will follow. But it seems to me that it's still such an embryonic idea. It's doing well. In some cases, it's doing really well. But it feels to me like you want to build that audience, establish the quality a bit more before you start charging for it.
And also get those numbers built up, and then you can start selling advertising as well. And there are obviously different models. I can understand why they might ask for a couple of quid, but 6 seems quite a lot to basically go from nothing to 6 quid when, if you assume they're a big cricket fan, they're quite likely to be paying Sky, possibly BT as well. All this adds up, and
yeah,
bit of money down there, Joe, in your neck of the woods, though. Right, I mean, what's 6 quid down
but they're
there?
hopefully trying to spread their wings further than Canterbury. I don't know.
Well, I tell you what it might actually hint at, and I might be totally wrong here, but and they might be absolutely thriving financially, but they have had financial problems, Kent, well documented over the last 10 years or so, and went to Canterbury County Council to have some financial assistance a few years back. And perhaps this does speak of a club that is trying to make ends meet. And while it's less than ideal from a slightly utopian spreading the game perspective, perhaps this is what they need to do in order to cover the costs of, as we were saying before the show began, these are not just back of a fag packet numbers. You know, you need a proper dedicated production team. You need at least 4 up to 8 different camera operators who are well established and know the ropes. We've worked on it a bit with Surrey, so we know what is required, and it's not just a couple of lads, drag them off the street and see what you can do.
Oh, was it not? I thought that's how you and Yas got the job.
No. At the front of the show it is. Who's in the oval?
Describe that as a...
Oh, there he just waves us over at the front of the show. Yeah, well, I walked into that. Yeah, right. Yeah, get stuff.
Look, having worked a lot in TV is really expensive, and I don't think the public generally realise you know, how expensive it is, the massive amounts of money that go into producing an outside broadcast. And even from a streaming level, I've been really amazed at how great a lot of the streaming is in the UK. And it's come a long time. Like I think I worked on the first time Cricket Australia broadcast a streamed match. And I reckon that was like about 2011. So that was the first time they did it. So this is all quite new. What'll be interesting for me is a couple of things. One is, will the counties end up coming to some kind of agreement amongst each other? Because you not only have home games, you've got away games. So how's that going to work as well? Like, is there going to be some sort of coordination between the counties to try and ensure that people can watch all of the games? And so if you pay for a membership, does that get you a deal with, you know, all the away games as well? That's quite interesting.
Totally. And I don't know how this is going to play out, but effectively Kent's games at Canterbury have now been paywalled. And if you're an Essex fan or a Northants fan, you want to watch your game, and you now have to pay money to get over the line. Whereas if they're playing at 17 other grounds, then you can watch it. So there's going to be a bit of tension in when all the CEOs get together for their mid-season meeting. There's going to be questions that have to be addressed here for sure. And you'd think a sort of coordinated response is probably inevitable at some point.
And if you say like Lancashire, who have put a lot of effort into their production, got a really kind of slick production now. If you're a Lancashire fan, you'd be like, well, I'm getting this for free, but I have to pay £6 to watch Kent's, and we don't yet know how good Kent's is going to be for £6. Then you can understand why they'd be like, well, hang on, what's going on here? So,
but it does speak of the disparity.
It will, and it'll be fascinating to see who goes next. Whether Kent are left alone in it, and whether it works or not, or whether other counties are thinking, "Oh, this is actually the margins are pretty small on this," and watching on with interest to see how Kent. But Kent have been brave; they've stuck their head above the parapet. But it feels like quite a lot to ask £6 per match.
I'm actually making my debut for Lancashire on Thursday,
nice.
doing the double header, and
Superb.
I don't know. Do you think I'm worth £6? I don't know. Some might just. I know I'm cheap.
The way you entered in the office, that was priceless.
Anyway, moving on to the Charlotte Edwards Cup. Northern Diamonds smashed the record for the highest ever score in the Charlotte Edwards Cup.
Winfield Hill, right?
And
Armitage,
Armitage hit 74 off 36 as they hit 218 for 3 against Western Storm. Jack asks, why do Thunder seem to be struggling to click over the last year or so? They have an incredibly strong team for the talent on paper, yet seem to struggle to push that to action on the field. Well, they've struggled in both competitions so far this season. We had Thunder's Tara Norris on the show a couple of weeks ago. I guess they've got a really strong bowling attack on paper, and the batting lineup just hasn't really fired. So the other day, no one really got going other than Emma Lamb. I don't think they've really put on a big team score yet in the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy. I think it just happens to teams sometimes that when you get a few batters out of nick, you know what, cricket can be quite hard. It can be quite hard to win games. I don't know, I think you sometimes get a group of players who are in a bit of a rut, and then it kind of snowballs a little bit, and I think that's what's happening to the Thunder at the moment. This is another interesting thing about the Charlotte Edwards Cup this year. Just there are loads of double headers. I think there are 20 double headers with Blast games, which isn't something that's actually massively happened in previous years. So given how successful that's been in the 100, kind of interested to see how that goes and how popular that is with county fans.
Just going back as well to your Head at Night interview, Joe, and alluding to selection coming up for the Ashes, and suddenly the pool is open, isn't it, in a way that it wouldn't have been in previous years, and you have these kinds of names. Obviously, Winfield Hill's been in and out the side for 10 years, but is enjoying real great form this year. Holly Armitage keeps getting runs. Paige Schofield was the star of last month, 2 back-to-back hundreds. So these kinds of names now have to come into the mix in a way that they wouldn't have done in the past. Yeah,
and Heather even said it's only the last couple of years that you can actually watch every ball. You know, on a very practical level. If you can't see it, and obviously more broadly is the quality of the competitions. They weren't convinced that if you made runs in county cricket, that proved that you could go on and play for England. Whereas now, if you do it in the 100, you're playing against the best players in the world. You're playing in a pressurised situation in big grounds. They're much more convinced that is a good breeding ground for international cricketers. And we've seen that, and that they've been much more inclined to fast-track players in. We've seen Alice Capsey, Izzy Wong, Lauren Bell. I think Grace Scrivens might possibly get a go this summer. If not this summer, then very soon after. And yeah, as I said, I've never felt like I've had that depth available to select from, and now she really does.
It's massively changed how players sort of ended up in the England team, because the way it used to work, while Australia was working on it, making its domestic system semi-professional and moving towards professional, England's county system was so unwieldy, and what they had like 36 teams or whatever it was. And so basically it seemed to always be based on Loughborough. You know, they'd be identified at a young age, they go into Loughborough, they go through their production line, and they pop out the other end with their England shirt. And that felt like that was the way that it happened here for a long period of time. All of a sudden, England have a much higher quality domestic system and competitive domestic system. And having spoken a lot to people around the Australian women's team, that is the key. Basically, having your best players playing against your best players all the time. And you just see that happening now. And it's fantastic with both of those tournaments as well. People talk about Big Bash in Australia, but the WNCL, the 50 over competition, is the backbone of that. And so now here you've got your Rachel Hayhoe Flint, but then also the Charlotte Edwards Cup. And England actually have 3 competitions now with the 100 as well. So they've almost got a better summer than Australia when you look at the structure of the domestic setup. Yeah,
and I guess with the problem with the Loughborough model is that players develop at different ages. If a player develops more in their mid to late 20s, that's an option now that didn't previously exist. So like last summer, Alice Davison-Richards scoring the 100 in a test match, her getting that opportunity at, I think, 27, 28, wasn't necessarily something that was possible even 5 or 6 years ago in the same way. Anyway, moving on. Are you looking for a meaningful Father's Day gift? If you are, explore our shop, our gift section at wisden.com.
Are women not allowed to drink whiskey?
Pardon?
No, but it's not Mother's Day coming up.
But it's only for Father's Day.
Stop trying to cause
Very cheeky.
trouble.
Sorry, start again, yes. Start again.
Are you looking for a meaningful Father's Day gift? If you are, head to the Wisden shop, the Wisden cricket gift section at wisden.com, where you'll find a wide selection of cricket-themed merchandise. Enjoy up to 30% off on all merch during our exclusive Father's Day sale. Visit wisden.com before the sale is over. You can get the whiskey for just £40. So that's one of many good deals on the Wisden shop at the moment. Over in India, it's IPL playoff week. It's Gujarat, Chennai, Mumbai, and Lucknow in the Final Four. I spoke to Wisden India editor Aadya Sharma about who he thinks will win it. By the time this goes out, we'll know who the first IPL finalist will be, but no one would have been knocked out. It's just the qualifier. Gujarat finished top like they did last year. Aadya, why are they so consistently good?
I think they've got great depth in their unit. I think they've got like a performer each game who sort of comes up and does well for them. Even like you say, the bowling, first of all, let's just talk about the bowling. They've got such, depth, as I said. You've got Shami, who's so good up front with the new ball. You've got Rashid Khan and Noor Ahmed in the middle, who just don't allow batsmen to sort of, open up. And then someone like a Mohit Sharma at the end has come in and sort of created a difference. So overall, the unit is really good. And batting wise also, they've got like a performer every game. Gill has been consistent throughout, but you've got these contributions from Vijay Shankar, David Miller, Tewatia chip in. You've got even Rashid coming in at the end and hitting. So it's overall a great unit composition wise, and they always have a plan for any given day.
Shubman Gill scored back-to-back hundreds at the end of the group stage. His game's gone to an altogether another level in the last 6 months. I think they're starting to call him the Prince of Indian batting. Is he on track, do you think, to be the next Kohli in terms of superstar status? It feels like it's changed very quickly. He was at Glamorgan in September, and I don't think there was that much fanfare about his 3-game Division 2 stint then. But yeah, do you think he's on that kind of trajectory?
I mean, yeah, obviously Kohli has put very lofty standards for himself. But Gill does come close to that because it's not like Gill has had only these 6 months. Obviously, there was a period of lull in the middle, but he's always been sort of the player for the future. Like even before his Test debut, even before we first saw him there, right from the Under-19 World Cup, he's been one of the stars, upcoming bright stars. His technique is good. His temperament is good. He, even in bouncing conditions, you saw it in Australia, how he had a great technique for that. In Indian conditions, he just flourishes. Overall, he just is a complete package, and I think it was just about putting in those performances over a consistent period of time, and that has happened in the last 6 months. I think he's only going to go up from here. It's going to be a great sort of like a season for him anyway. It's been, but I think he's just going to go further up. For Kohli, obviously, comparison-wise, it's still quite a bit far away, but you can see the same level of flourish and the same consistency for sure.
I guess I meant more in terms of the adulation that he receives as much as what he achieves on the pitch. His kind of levels of popularity seem to be soaring at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he is really, I mean, there's sort of a connect with the young masses. That's there. It's sort of an image of a new India, of a competitive, consistent player who gives it back, not necessarily aggressively on the field, but with performances. It's been really good to see how he's sort of being a part of the team.
He's got an eye for what works on social media as well. I saw that he posted a very saucy picture on Instagram that did numbers in a way that I think a young Kohli probably would do as well.
The caption said thirst trap, and a lot of people had the side-by-side image of a young Kohli as well, saying, there you are, two princes of Indian cricket.
On Kohli, he scored back-to-back hundreds as well, and RCB just fell short of qualification. It was a really good season in the end for Kohli. I did think though there seemed to be a trend that actually quite classical batters have done really well in the IPL, and particularly in the power play this season. Kohli, Gill, Rahane, Faf, Jaiswal, Conway. What do you think that is? It almost seems like a bit of a reversion away from a trend we might have seen in the last few years.
Yeah, you're right. It's an interesting pattern, actually. I guess, I mean, it could be one of the reasons that you feel that there's more depth to your batting. You've got an impact player coming in later, so you can sort of like take more time to settle in, play your shots freely when you have someone to do the catching up if needed. That could be a reason. But yeah, it's been a trend for sure. It's been something that we've seen over the season.
I think it's 2 years now since we had the slightly expanded IPL with more teams and more games. In the UK, I think interest in the tournament goes up and down in waves. In India, is there an appetite for even more? Do you think hardcore fans of the franchises want longer IPLs? Do they want IPL cricket over international cricket?
I know this varies from person to person, but from what I've discussed with people, a few of them do think that it sort of extends for a long period of time. But at the same time, I think this particular IPL season, there's been a lot of interest. First of all, because it's a home away format that's come back, more people are going to the grounds. There's interest, there's sort of a connect with the ground, with the team, much more. You've got the Dhoni angle for CSK, it might be his last season. Kohli has come back to form, so there's a big chunk of fans following that as well. The youngsters are doing well. So I think there are more reasons to follow it now. I think the interest level has been, and I think this tournament itself has been pretty engaging to watch. So I've seen fewer complaints this time. From what I've heard, people don't really mind at this point. If it does stretch a bit longer, if it becomes longer than this, I think it would create sort of it would be a bit of a challenge, really.
I think, do you think there's a realization that the current length is probably about right? There's almost a paranoia, I think, about the IPL becoming longer and longer. But I was looking up the other day that the IPLs in the early 2010s were actually even longer than the ones now. So the broader picture actually isn't one of constantly getting bigger and bigger. It's fluctuated a little bit, but hasn't actually got that much longer.
Yeah. Also, I think it's also because there's so much cricket now compared to, say, what it was 10 years ago, where you feel that the international calendar is completely packed. That's also sort of one of the reasons, like, there were so many T20 leagues happening, say, a month ago in Jan as well. So I think that's what has created this sort of an image that, there's just a lot of more cricket happening now than it used to.
Well, we've got a action-packed week to look forward to in the IPL. Aadya, we'll talk next week when we'll know who the 2023 IPL winner is. Cheers for your time. So, to end the show, we've got an email from one of our listeners. David says, "Hi guys, I've been trying to think if there are any top sevens to rival England's likely lineup for the Ireland Test as the most attacking of all time. The best I could do was Fredericks, Greenwich, Canhai, Lloyd, Richards and Keith Boyce, West Indies in Australia in 74, 75. Can you think of any other suggestions? I can't think of any other contenders in my time without at least one player to drop anchor. I'm old enough to remember paying to watch an England top three that included Jeff Boycott and Chris Tavares. Love the podcast, highlight of my week. I did a little bit of research, basically just went on Stats Guru and typed in Shahid Afridi, when did he play with Imran Nazir? And there was one test match, it's actually Pakistan's biggest ever test match win, where they beat New Zealand by an innings of 300. Inzamam scored a 100, and Shoaib took 6 for 11, bowling pretty much literally 100 miles per hour. So they had Imran Nazir and Shahid Afridi opening the batting. Then you had the proper guys in Yunus Khan, Inzamam and Mohammad Yusuf, 3, 4, 5. And you had Abdul Razak at number 6, which is quite fun.
Class.
He hit the biggest six I've ever seen, Abdul Razak.
Yeah.
Lords, landed on the mound stand roof. Yeah, that's attacking.
That's good.
Most Australian teams in my lifetime.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard.
Yep.
Yeah, all those Australian teams at the turn of the century, but the 06, 07, actually when Damien Martin, who was no slouch himself, but when he retired midway through that series and they brought in Andrew Simons, so they ended up with Hayden Langer, Ponting, Hussey, Clark, Simons, Gilchrist. So no one's dropping anchor there. But actually on the flip side, that the England 05 Ashes side as well, I mean, that's got to be, it's probably not in comparison with what we're looking at now, but Trescothick, Strauss, Vaughan,
I guess Bell was...
Peterson. Bell, and he was, he wasn't getting a run as well. You couldn't say he was coming out and giving it some.
But get Trescothick, Peterson, Flintoff in the top 6.
And then, Geraint Jones at 7 as well. And I got another West Indies one. I went for Clayton Lambert and worked backwards because him and Philo Wallace were this kind of, they were very much your Bazball opening partnership, but they always had Shandapal in that side.
Yeah.
But Clayton Lambert debuted a few years before that opening partnership. 91.
Out there?
Was it out there? Oh, it was out there. Yeah, you're right. 5-wicket win for England. So the West Indies top 7, Simmons, Haynes, Richie Richardson, Carl Hooper, Clayton Lambert, Viv, and then Jeff Dujon.
In the douche. Coolest of them all.
So yeah, they didn't get many runs in that match, though, did they?
No, they blew out. It's 2-2. Good series, that.
But anyway, that's a great question, David. And as always, if you've got one of those longer questions, you can email us at podcast@wisden.com to get in touch. That is everything for today's show. Thanks, Mel. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Phil. And listeners, well done for getting to the end of this monster episode. We'll be back next week, 2 or 3 days before the start of the test summer.